The reason for my title, at least the last part concerning love and business, I think perhaps that's the most important thing to clarify quickly. This is taken from a passage from Georg Simmel in his philosophy of money. In that passage, he says, love, which, according to Plato, is an intermediate stage between possessing and not possessing, is in the inner subjective life what means are in the objective external world. For a man who is always striving, never satisfied, always becoming, love is a true condition. Means, on the other hand, and their enhanced form, the tool, symbolize the human genus. So this situates a little bit the nature of this intervention, where I will be concerned, I think, mainly with the co-evolution of human beings and machines, and seeing if we can find out meaningful ways of looking at goal-seeking behaviors, complex goal-seeking systems, as it were. But before I get to that point, I would like to introduce myself a little bit further, as Eve asked. My name is Theodor Barth. I'm a social anthropologist. Social anthropologists are people who do field work. They like detailed ethnographic descriptions, and then they like to think about them afterwards. I've been working a great deal with Frederick Barth, who's my namesake. He's not my father, but he's the father of an approach, which I am a bit curious whether or not has a confluence with the methodologies of complexity science. It's called the generative analysis. These are, let's say, intricacies. I would like first to give an appraisal of where I see, where I try to situate the meaning of what we are doing here in the larger picture, and also to place my own contribution within that perception. I think that the broadest, and excuse me for doing a little interjection, I've decided I wanted to do an experiment at this conference to find out the answer, perhaps, or perhaps I won't have an answer, on why it is that Immanuel Wallerstein, a French social scientist, is conspicuously absent from the complexity science reference list very often, although he has published in this area and written, in my view, quite interesting things. He made a very broad statement for complexity research in social science in the Gulbenkian report of 1996, published in Lisboa in 1996. And the report is called Open the Social Sciences. And of course, the committee that worked under his leadership were concerned with issues of opening the social science towards natural sciences and technology, but also to humanities. This, I think, is a bit a call of the day as well, as we have seen from previous introductions. These views are based on a book written by Wallerstein in 1991 called Unthinking the 19th Century Social Science. So his take on complexity theory is not the narrow scope of things happening today, but the broad evolution within social science over a scope of 1 century, particularly emphasizing the development of multidisciplinarity in France, the Brodelian concept of multidisciplinarity, which was, one might say, the rationale for creating La Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, one of France's main multidisciplinary academic institutions, and was intended to break down the barriers between institutional academic disciplines. Wallerstein claims that they failed to do so. And he proposes that the complexity framework might do a better job of providing a unified, let's say, perspective and approach to understand our world in a more active way, and being, I think, quite specific on the active part. A former world systems theorist, Wallerstein is of course not a liberalist. His take on economy is political, and though certainly he cannot be considered a Marxist, and I should add any more because he used to be one, his take on complexity could in my view be called neo-Weberian. That is, he vouches for a research program in social sciences on how ideas are situated in realities. The new Wallerstein insists on the plural form of realities and not reality, and how they are under the pressure from outside forces, notably globalization, coalesce in phase transitions to become complex. In other words, previously unrelated realities and their ideas start to manifest collective or systemic behaviors. Well, we are here to inquire into such dynamics and to see if we can combine our methods and views to coalesce in such ways. I think that it is particularly important that this takes place in Finland, not only because of Nokia miracle design, the workings of the Finnish innovation system, but because of that Finland, despite its linguistic uniqueness, or perhaps because of it, has succeeded in becoming a harbor for contemporary European ideas in a very short time. I think to the point that it has succeeded in attracting an intellectual spark from Greek Alexandria, which I think, to me, is the epitome of European culture. So here we are at the extremes of the continent, and I think that's it's a very good omen, so to speak, without being superstitious about that term. So I'm going to present you a case from an enterprise. But before going into that, I would like to present some foundations for it. Because what I will try to do is to let's say, make plausible a case demonstration. How do you demonstrate a case rather than simply showing a case or talking about a case? How do we interact with technologies when we understand and communicate? And this is also why I have brought along a model, which you see on a small part here, the opening part here, or just a little fragment actually, it's a big model. And I will be showing it in a short time. What I am trying to ask is just a moment. Yes. I have had some trouble with really applying the concept of emergence on some of my materials. I think that there are other dynamics that are as interesting perhaps, and which I wish to explore today, is about how unordinary things become ordinary. And how knowledge which requires our full attention and our struggle becomes tacit. So to speak, going into the tacit knowledge discussion from an alternative end, not discussing whether we should codify it or not. This is let's say, a language from knowledge management, which many of you might be familiar with, that the knowledge management agenda is growing forth from our ambition to build better IT systems and the number of approaches resulting from those understandings of technology have, let's say, brought knowledge to the fore as a separate area of management, and which has evolved from that point onwards. Now, there have been many critical voices to whether or not we can, to the questions of whether it is meaningful to codify tacit knowledge. In a sense, it ceases to be codified somehow. And when we learn to relate to the systems that codify such knowledge, our ways of working change, and the description is no longer valid. As David Snowden loves to say, best practice, which might be is what is being represented in systems, very quickly becomes past practice. And we may also imagine how businesses come in and try to straighten up systems by making add-ons or doing so-called maintenance and feeding ever more past practice into the system. There are other reasons why one might be skeptical of codifying knowledge in such ways. And one of them is first practice learning. The tasks we have today as a result of, let's say, a burgeoning or a seminal post-industrial way of working is the diversification of tasks and the increased frequency of first practice learning. We are challenged with jobs that tell us, can you do this? And we never did it before. And we say, yes, I can. And we'd like to enable this. And then obviously, systems that are based on prefigured descriptions of work processes have trouble in meeting this need. A third reason we might be skeptical let's say, to the extent we might codify knowledge or tacit knowledge, I would, to some extent, I think maybe we should in this situation, we should just talk about knowledge. But okay, let's stick to the metaphor precisely because I want to look at it from the other end. But still, if you look at expert knowledge in systems, the company that I've been working with has, for instance, made a knowledge support system for the Supreme Court in Norway. And this system is in many ways a very intelligent system from, let's say, the way systems can be intelligent. And this is the issue, isn't it? I mean, how do we define the intelligence of systems, and when do we have to look at the interaction between human beings and systems to pursue these discussions, to get beyond Turing, so to speak. Yeah, I suppose you're familiar with the Turing test, is that, you know, that machines, yeah, okay, I will jump that. Mika says yes, so that he speaks for everyone. Okay, good. But at any rate, if you look at experts at the Supreme Court, what makes them experts is that they know about the shortcuts that other people don't know of, and not only that, but they know when they apply. One could, of course, imagine that some form of artificial intelligence succeeded in representing such use cases into the system and might make the system behave intelligently to respond to such needs. But on the other hand, it might fail, and this is really dramatically irritating. With the type of agent technology we see applied wherever it is possible these days, the suggestions are usually just noise. They become like, you know, light what you call advertisements in big cities. They are flashing at you all the time, and you get used to not noticing them. I suppose you've all understood I'm talking about, you know, Microsoft. I mean, they're putting all these type of gadget things into their system. They're correcting 2 languages at the same time, for instance. They're correcting my Norwegian, and at the same time they're introducing a capital I every time I'm using an I. So, you know, you have English standards and Norwegian standards that are intermingling and so forth. What I'm trying to say is that the codification of tacit knowledge, assuming that a lot of valuable knowledge is tacit and is folded into practice, and sort of ails from reflective practices in knowledge organizations, warrants all kinds of codification of this practice and brings us into a number of troubles. And so I'm merely trying to highlight the problems of describing or codifying, I think, rather than tacit knowledge, is the second loop of learning, to talk with Argyris. That systems, IT systems probably are better and can be quite good in describing the first loop of learning, doing things right, following procedures, following specifications and so forth, whereas the other loop, which is to do the right things, require a different type of angle if you want to support it with technology. This is the main argument. Okay, so what I wish to do is to look at let's say emergence from the other end also. How, let's say, holistic properties that are related to the interaction of elements in a system can become folded into a system. So we are talking about what one could call emergence. That is, or submergence is a bad word. Emergence, I think, with an I and two M's, is what I'd like to approach. And this is also a story of how, let's say, systems that do manifest such behavior. And when I'm talking of systems, I'm talking of systems of human beings. And machines, or just human beings alone. Very rarely about systems alone, and then I will tell you when they produce or let's say generate holistic properties. These can in turn be internalized by users and become part of their repertoire of professional identities. I'm also concerned with the fact that such holistic properties, as Eve pointed out, complex systems are multidimensional. There can be many holistic properties in the system at the same time. And they can be, well, I suppose why we talk about complex systems is that somehow they are textured. And that the properties of the type that I'm talking of, the holistic properties, can be of many different types and sometimes contradictory even. They are not necessarily cohesive, and if they are cohesive at a different level. And then the faculty of complex system of producing cohesiveness or to coalesce traits that are multiple and sometimes contradictory is something which I think we can actually go in and study. So this is so much for emergence and how much it deserves our attention. And then, of course, if we are talking of a system which goes from a, let's say, complex dynamic situation to a simpler state, how should we consider that? This is actually what happens in the company where I brought a case, is that they went from a very I would say dynamic and complex form of organization, and the organization really had skill and knowledge in let's say managing distributed and mobile work situations in projects that were spread all over the country, to a situation where they became organized in business areas and became bottom line focused and changed to become a production company. This is rather a question: are we bound to consider that this is let's say, a type of development which is, tragic for our gospel? Or is it a phenomenon in its own right that we should try to understand? And this is again why I became interested in looking at other types of complex dynamics than those related to emergence, and look at how knowledge becomes tacit and how instruments become very quickly can become part of the things that we take for granted, but that these dynamics also are complex, and that emergence, how they are folded into practice from, let's say, into systems and into practice, into users, into organizations, is something which could catch our interest. After going through the case, I will now present the case as the case, and then I will try to explain to you what rationales I have to talk about a case demonstration. In the end, I will return to some of the theoretical backgrounds that I use in general complexity theory, which is Prigogine and Stenger's read by Wallerstein, which I commented initially, and then also some models from my own field, from generative analysis. And this is where the generative analysis of knowledge in disordered systems come from. Disordered systems is a concept of generative analysis, and it is rather close, I think, as a cousin to other constructs one finds in complexity research. Though it might not, it might not. I think definitely it is not. This connection has not been made explicit to this point in academic publications. So these are the targets. Now I will quickly introduce the case. The names I use are, of course, well, not of course, we used Rolls-Royce, but I've anonymized my case. But anyway, it's a bit, well, no, you won't be able to see the name of the implement. So at any rate, the company I'm going to talk about is called, in my case, Simplicitas Incorporated. And the company it merges with is called Theodorakis. Theodorakis is a company selling a modeling tool, and the reason they went through a merger with Theodorakis in Simplicitas is that they wanted not only to merge with the personnel, but also with the technologies. And this is why one cannot really look at the dynamics of the organizational history independently from technology. So, as I said to Eve yesterday, this is a little bit an attempt, which is it poses some methodological difficulties, because it's like trying to give a commentary of a book while at the same time describing the people that are reading it, which is, you know, two different types of exercises. And I think it warrants new forms of interweaving of technologies and verbal presentation. So in the first phase, before the phase transition, you have the CEO, his name in the case is Lawrence Montana, was organized in a way much similar to our current visions of the future job market. it took pride in its competent management of human and technological resources in the distributed and mobile enterprise. In this sense, Simplicitas Incorporated had made triple-looped learning, which is a concept of Flood, Norman Robert Flood from a book called Diversity Management. They had made this an organizational asset. So in terms of being, let's say, working with sense-making in this organization, which we did, we were working with narratives, one could say that Simplicitas was already a self-sense-making organization. And our opportunity was really to interact with that, to spur organizational change, or to work with the development of organizational change which adapted to the changes the company went through externally. One rationale for acquiring Theodorakis Limited and merging with it was to boost the power of modeling used in user participant IT development projects, and build an environment that would serve as a common reference for the IT consultants working with people and the system developers that did the actual programming. Another rationale for acquiring Theodorakis was to develop the seminal market for their modeling tool in the United States. After the Klinger-Cohen Act was adopted in 1996, all federal organizations had to account for their ICT investments by modeling an enterprise architecture, giving a full view of their active knowledge assets before being allowed to make any further ICT investments. However, the returns on Theodorakis did not come as quickly as anticipated by Lawrence Montana and the board of owners in the Swedish-owned company Turnip. Required a change in the management and organization of Simplicitas Incorporated. So Lawrence Montana was exchanged for Simone Beauvoir at the head of the company in 2002, and the company was organized into business areas, one of which was devoted entirely to the Theodorakis tool. It eventually turned out that Theodorakis tool had struck a booming market in the United States in the public sectors, and soon became the locomotive of Simplicitas Incorporated. The new CEO, Simon Beauvoir, was quick to earn himself a reputation as an efficient manager. The ownership structure of the company was changed, and the company adapted to a situation of servicing the requirements of Theodorakis users in the American public sector from their localities at the outskirts of Oslo, some of them shuttling to assist the daughter company SNA in the United States, headed by West Point educated William Bright. From the technological point of view, Simplicitas Incorporated had literally gone through a revolution, while Theodorakis was a backstage, in the Goffmanian sense, used by IT consultants and programmers as a common reference to build systems based on user participation. AI, artificial intelligent agent technologies, as I talked about earlier, object orientation, and an interface allowing the user to triangulate the knowledge resources of the system. If you look at the whiteboard over there, I put up an interface of 3 boxes, one with knowledge resources to the left. The top is a process description of let's say, a codified work process, and then below there's a state report of communication and logistics. If you looked at this at the Supreme Court, for instance, and you would have legal documents to the left, down to the left in the left corner, you would have the legal process on top with specification of all the routines, and then you would have who has the case and current state of communications at the phase that the user consults the system. Of course, the 3 of them are synchronized. So Theodorakis eventually became the front stage in the United States, and was used as a Trojan horse to market the previous technological achievements of the company in the Norwegian public sector during the 90s. At this juncture, we have the choice of understanding this shift in terms of linear evolution or a phase transition. The distinction made by Wallerstein between a linear evolution and a phase transition is that a linear evolution is a, let's say, a transformation in time, whereas a phase transition is a transformation of time. And I will come back to this later as a concept I would suggest of deep time as a way of looking at this. If we want to be naively realistic, we could draw the conclusion that when the shares crashed at the stock exchange, the Turnip consortium saw that Theodorakis was going to be a success in the United States and therefore rid itself of the CEO Lawrence Montano and the foolhardy nostalgia of Norwegian social democratic company values along with him. In the same spirit of naive realism, we may also think that the company didn't have any lasting values after all, since one way or another it was trying to sell its technology as a Trojan. Then we might add pros and cons to that view and gain more nuance, but only to end up with yesterday's wisdom on capitalist enterprises. If we wish to go in the systems view, however, we must go deep. The following case serves the purpose of deep time analysis of Simplicitas Incorporated as a complex system and the evolution of a gross technological configuration outlined above as generated by human interaction through 6 different layers. Each of these layers constitute a world, the general meaning of which will be explained during the case. For now, I ask you kindly to accept that you are going to travel through 6 worlds called U2, Mem, this is U2, we start there, Mem, Bao, Kin, Siv, and finally Dude. Dude, not like the big great Lebowski, but D-U-D-E. I will explain this later. And then I will return to you two back again in order to sum up what we have learned. This choice simply represents a different strategy than naive realism and should be judged for its comparative value. Our objective is to learn something new about knowledge work management as a third estate, as an endowment between the private and public sphere of ownership, and whether or not the simile of, let's say, some sort of currency or exchange of, let's say, pattern intelligence can be a good metaphor for how knowledge is linked to value creation. The intuition that motivates this objective is that knowledge may be buckled up in research institutions and academia, but is also vulnerable to inflation. This was already stressed by Pierre Bourdieu, French sociologist, in La Distinction in 1979. Okay, when I came to the Simplicitas Incorporated in 2000, as a newly employed social anthropologist in SINTEF industrial management, at that time, now it's become technology and society, which is, I think, auspicious of the type of development we're in, all of us. I become involved in a project on the use of narratives as knowledge carriers, as vehicles of reflective practice and a sense-making approach to management of organizational change. This was an action research project focused on co-generative learning in the sense of activity theory and organized around large group events. However, since my department at the Institute, the Department of Knowledge and Strategy, was subletting a field office inside the premises of Simplicitas Incorporated, I took whichever opportunity I had to do more extended anthropological fieldwork inside the company, following the traditional method of social anthropology of participant observation. In other words, I was partaking of day-to-day conversation and stories told at the copying machines and corridors in and out of meetings, development work using simplicitous technologies and more conventional issues. So I became fairly conversant with the necessity of selling my interests into the company's ongoing activity, and perhaps more important, I learned a lesson on writing knowledge as a member of a community. I did my interviews, for instance. I edited them, sent them back to the interviewees, got back their comments, and at the same time a blatant lack of interest in such knowledge. Getting back your own knowledge is not interesting. Getting back an original traversion of your field is interesting, because then you're acting as an interface that might make that other person's knowledge relevant. So interfacing is one reason why I've found a certain number of reasons to amend the traditional anthropological method of fieldwork. If we are now going through the worlds, I would like to just say that one can create worlds in many different ways, and one can also go in and talk about them in any grain of detail one might wish. For obvious reasons, the ones I'm going to present are quite cursory. But they give a principle for building worlds that I've been using. Each world is structured by 4 boundary markers. Enter and exit are spatial boundary markers. Background and purpose are chronological boundary markers. Each world has an emblem or boundary object. I think that when we talk of objects, we can talk about relational objects as well, as an aspect of turning to relations. And I think in that case, I think boundary objects is an interesting way of turning the issue. So this serves as a common term of reference for more or less detailed accounts we could make of each world. I like to think of Simplicitas Incorporated as a kite. This is an acronym for Knowledge Intensive Technology Enterprise. Interesting thing about kites is that they fly, so it is a metaphor as well. Before the transition, I would say that Simplicitas Incorporated worked as a synarchy. We've heard Ali was speaking about hierarchies and hierarchies. Synarchy is a word for joint rule, and presupposes a shared estate. And a shared estate in let's say, a distributed and mobile organization presuppose that it indeed does have features that manifest themselves above or at another level of complexity than the interaction between agents. So I think more or less that yes, Simplicitas Incorporated was a truly complex organization with the wisdom of complexity management incorporated, and they knew it. I had meetings with the management and David Snowden at one occasion, and they understood each other completely. So it's like we were really trying to do research together. We were doing research with, not research on, which I think in action research is an important distinction. Okay. This is a headline which you see on the top, and the bottom is simply a mantra which I'm going to repeat for all of these objects. So when we enter U2, this is a world of show and tell, in which people learn from each other in front of a computer screen, a whiteboard, a flip over with yellow pads, a smart board, etc. They do not need to be present in the same room. They can, for instance, use a video link, but they have to hear each other speaking and see each other showing, drawing and pointing, in such a way that they can follow the alternation between verbal and manual operations of all members in the group and the mediation of this dynamic through a technological interface. This is where our mantra begins. Now we go through the, let's say, the chronological boundary. Background. In U2, Simplicitas Incorporated is attracted to storytelling because it has a background in case-based learning from artificial intelligence. The veterans in the management found some similarities between the importance of good use cases for the sound use of AI as a style of problem solving in systems, and the importance of context for learning in general, and for the knowledge retrieved from their systems to elicit competent action. In the way they worked with systems development, they were not only concerned with the representation of the users in their systems by the use of agents, but also with the representation of the system to its users. And I'm saying to its users because this was still an expert dimension, not in the users, which in my view is critical. I'm returning to this. Next chronological boundary, purpose. The purpose of Simplicitas Incorporated in U2 is to draw out the potential of their view of human-computer interaction, HCI, in interfaces that optimize the access, use, reporting, storage, and carefully adapted to the requirements and needs of their customers. The typical interface, as I've shown, in Simplicitas systems is an arrangement of 3 windows that help the users in triangulating their knowledge at all times. One window may, for instance, show a display of document resources, while the second display aggregates process with access to its constituent procedures, and then the third window shows the current status charting the logistics and communications log. Exit. In U2, the approach to modeling in Simplicitas Incorporated is of crucial importance. This approach, called object orientation, requires the IT consultants developing systems with the participation of users in customer organizations to model the system by using a method that makes the distance between the prototyping and programming as small as possible. This usually requires the attention of a project manager that can communicate both ways, with the customers and the developers. U2 is a flat world in this sense that the distance between actual and virtual properties of systems is as small as possible. Now we are moving towards MEM. Enter. MEM is the world of tasks and procedures in which people delegate mental operations to operations precision require operations to manual procedures on a mouse pad, a keyboard, an abacus, etc. In this world, the alternation between mental and manual operations do not flow as freely as in the previous world, and the people in this world require that manual operations be monitored step by step as a condition for the output to be accepted as an equivalent of the mental operation. Background. In this world, Simplicitas Incorporated has a different background than in the previous one. When the old boys broke out from a larger enterprise to form their own company, Simplicitas Incorporated, in 1985, they were the most established AI milieu in Norway, the universities and engineering schools included. As they became independent, they moved from working with expert systems in Norwegian process industry to develop multi-user systems for large bureaucratic organizations in the Norwegian public sector. Purpose. The purpose of Simplicitas Incorporated in MEM is to reveal to their users in a step-by-step fashion how much of their work, even executive and creative work, is bound up in routines, much more than they think. By formalizing these routines, the values of increasing the quality of public services may be developed. By formalizing these routines, the values increasing the quality of public services may be developed. The company objective is to help their customers to develop competent behavior by removing the stumbling stones of modern bureaucracy. Exit. In MEM, the programmers experience a distance between the job they have to do in building the actual systems and the prototype they inherit from the IT consultants when they are done working with the users. On the other hand, the users experience other needs when the system is delivered than when they participated in its development or submitted their requirements. MEM is a deeper world than U2, as the distance between the virtual and actual properties of systems are larger. Now we are moving towards BAO. Enter. In the BAO world, Simplicitous Incorporated is a marketplace in which people place their bids on projects and projects place their bids on people. This alternation is mediated by a coactive environment, that is an environment in which there is an offer and demand for services available through the interface of stationary PCs connected to an intranet. This is why I'm talking about IT systems. These people don't use mobile solutions and are not very aware of this side. They're working much more on the work aspect of ICT use or IT use. Background. The background of Simplicitous Incorporated in BAO is an enterprise culture in which people are expected to seek challenges that are interesting to them and contribute to their professional development whenever the project portfolio is thick, while they are expected to chip in when they are needed whenever the project portfolio is lean. The portfolio is compared to a cherry tree. Quote, the people that work here sometimes pick from the cherry tree, and sometimes it is the cherries that pick them, unquote. Purpose. In BAO, Simplicitous Incorporated is a periodically loose, tight group of urban hunters and gatherers living from projects. While the bulk of development goes in projects, the harvest is organized in processes and carried out by process owners. Knowledge management, strategy, frameworks, product, personnel, resource monitor, etc. In this world, the company has 25 process owners with a total of about 170 employees. The total R&D budget is no more than 5%. Exit. In BAO, there are ever pending tasks of updating and maintenance for which there are no clear procedures. No mobile devices are used except for mobile phones. Most transactions and agreements are reached in face-to-face encounters, and the virtual resources are sophisticated billboards available through a common interface. The BAO is a deeper world than the previous one because the connections between the actual and virtual properties of the compound system, although they exist, are very difficult to trace. Now we're moving on to kin. As you can see, I've been using here the sand pile metaphor, and obviously we are going into sort of the areas where the power law could be applied. Enter. The kin world. The kin is a world of waywardness, upheavals, and reversals. In this world, facilities are booked by employees who turn up with groups of customers and nobody else in Simplicitous Incorporated knows about it. The thrill of being in a community with thrifty colleagues alternates with the devastating news from a customer organization of unpredicted cuts in projects at the order of a manager nobody has ever seen. Background. During the 90s, in the kin world, Simplicitous Incorporated started to use the DSDM approach to systems development. DSDM, is that a foreign word? Should I define it? Dynamic Systems Development Method. Okay, it was, this was largely due to experiences with sequential systems development, or the waterfall method, and customers whose initial requirements did not match the needs revealed upon delivery of the systems. DSDM represented a way of assisting the customers in formulating their needs step by step by iterating module prototypes and working synchronously with the totality of modules. Purpose. In the kin world, there is no purpose without the maintenance of purpose. A significant amount of effort in the delivery process of an IT system is invested in the maintenance of contract relations with the customer. The management of customer expectations is a core issue, and networks of people who understand each other, quote unquote, acquire an intrinsic value. Contract maintenance and expectation management are both concerned with a common understanding of the delivery at the level of financial transaction. Exit. Some of the consultants in the kin world feel that they are primarily involved with people. Technology plays a marginal part in what they are doing in projects. Some of them even grow to become techno-skeptics, which is sensational in a company like this, actually, because it's based on love for technology. Simplicitous Incorporated makes a major joint effort to create an arena for common sense making by using narratives or stories, to the point of actually taking the whole company up in the mountain resort and working with narratives the whole day, 5 minutes. Actually, I was promised 10 past. 10 past, okay, okay. Okay, good. That's right. Okay. Even so, the stories underscore the breach between consultants and programmers. Some quit their jobs to work full times with storytelling, while other stories drove new hopes into Simplicitas Incorporated wealth of technologies. In the kin world, the distance between the actual and virtual reaches a maximum, so it is the deepest world. Now we move to the Civ. I'll put priority to go through the demo, and then I'll just briefly go through the conclusions. This is the Civ world. How odd. Misfire. Okay. Enter. In the Civ world, professional interaction is expected to converge towards value creation for Simplicitas Incorporated. The employees are invoicing by the hour, a maximum on external projects. It has some similarities with the MEM world, in the sense that it requires a meticulous account, hour by hour, for tasks delegated to the knowledge engineers. Background. In the Civ world, Simplicitas Incorporated acquired the Theodor modeling tool through a merger in 2000 with the company that developed it through customer projects, since the company was founded in the mid-80s as Simplicitas. However, projects in which the two technologies could be merged according to the original vision of using Theodorakis as a common reference of consultants and developers at the backstage of IT systems somehow escaped the Simplicitas in a tight race. It lost money on Theodorakis and fired a number of Simplicitas Incorporated people from lack of projects. I think it should be noted that it fired none of the Theodorakis people, although they earned nil. So it says something about that they actually did have an objective, though this was voiced by no one. But in these priorities, I think it's quite important. Exit. In the Civ world, now we go to the purpose. The purpose of Simplicitas Incorporated in the Civ world is to market the Theodorakis tool in the United States to service the needs of the American public sector after the adoption of the Klinger-Cohen Act in 1996. Risks and stakes are high, so the company also targets big, robust, long-term projects in the Norwegian public sector. Exit. It is in the Civ world that Simon Beauvoir takes the relief of Lawrence Montana as the CEO of Simplicitas Incorporated. The Civ world is still quite deep in the sense that the relationship between actual and virtual properties of the company as a system, that is the company's cash situation and its seminal markets in the United States, is difficult to trace. The Turnip Consortium, one of the major shareholders in Simplicitas Incorporated, fires all the CEOs of its daughter companies to show their shareholders its willingness to act. Simplicitas Incorporated, when the company gets its act together, succeed in establishing new owners. Now we come to the dude world. Now you see it's a design for user design exchange. It's not the Coen brothers dude. Enter. The dude world is a possible world and concomitantly constitutes a scenario world. In this world, Simplicitas Incorporated picks up its long-standing interest in knowledge work, as well as its experience in adapting expert technologies to larger groups of users, and starts developing the Theodorakis tool as a general application for personal users without special background in modeling. Background. The customers in the American federal organizations were people developing an expertise in enterprise modeling and forming small teams working through the Theodorakis team server. They were happy with the tool and became involved in its further development. At the executive level of these organizations, the perception of utility of the tool was limited to doing the job required by the Klinger-Cohen Act, externally imposed stricture. The models themselves are intransparent to general ICT users, and because they are mechanical and work as a sophisticated abacus, they require the knowledge and dexterity of an expert to yield their benefits. The abacus aspects can be, I think, illustrated shortly by looking at how these objects contain relationships, and these relationships are objects that can be described. They are searchable, they can be grouped in very complicated, like almost the figures that we saw earlier that Auli showed. We can group them and we can look at full pictures of only relationships that also relate to objects. This program has a capacity of about 100,000 objects compared to Visio, which perhaps is the closest to it in some senses, has a capacity of about 10,000, as far as I know. That's the last information I had about this. Okay. Purpose. In the dude scenario, the IT systems of Simplicitas Incorporated are reoriented to a novel purpose and designed for user design exchange. That is, knowledge support systems of the type developed by Simplicitas Incorporated are designed to respond to the patterns of use design created by the end user and made available to others whenever they are rated successful. This could be automated, or it could be on another exchange base or your team server. Exit. The dude world is fairly shallow, since the relationship between the virtual and actual properties of this world as a system is fairly tight. The assignment of going about broadening the population of users in the dude scenario comes to Simplicitas Incorporated when the calls for transparency in the federal accounting is voiced, for instance by public opinions. There was already some voices in this direction. Now we come to the final object. Enter. As we return to U2, it is still a world of show and tell. Only now the use of the Theodorakis tool is used for that purpose. This Theodorakis tool contains a lot of technology from Simplicitas systems and is designed to interact with them. Background. When Simplicitas Incorporated experienced a commercial success with the Theodorakis tool in the United States, it started to think of the tool as a Trojan horse for its framework of technologies developed from a number of systems development projects, past and ongoing. Purpose. The purpose of Simplicitas Incorporated upon returning to U2 is to use object orientation as an approach to modeling holistic properties in systems, and thereby alert its employees about a feature of final causation, referring to Juarero's book, which has nothing to do with teleology and scientific explanation, has nothing to do with that. From its inception and in the process of its realization, the objective reveals the system to itself. This is emergence, and this is how a system may be modeled to acquire a self. Before a system has a self, it becomes meaningless to say that it has this or that, or it manifests properties that are emergent, etc. These properties need to belong to the system, so it needs to have a self, also to be self-organized. It is a presupposition. So we have to attack the problematics of belonging to a system and belonging to an organization. In this case, these are quite related issues. So the final exit, the test of emergence, because we should do tests, of the entire series, I suggest is the following. If all the previous worlds are contained by this return to U2, then, and if emergence is effective, we will not need to return to mem, bow, kin, sieve, and jude again. And this is generally applicable for any research, technology that makes us struggle in the making, but we take for granted when it works. Sometime in the future, which requires a lot of energy and struggle to conceive at this moment in conceptual and practical terms, will be a trifle included what I'm presently talking about. So it is on that concluding note, I will not go into these theoretical details, because I think now we should remain on the practical level and try to keep the time. I think that it is important that we consider the possibilities that organizational change is not unidirectional. It can, with complexity in mind, it can go from complex to less complex in phases. My bet is that if or when, depending on, Simplicitas goes into the venture that I outlined just now, it will again change its organization.